Hi, I'm Dr. Boyce Watkins reporting here for Ball Sports, where black men control the conversation. And I am here with a guy that I have a lot of respect for, and hopefully you know who he is. If you don't, you should definitely check his work out. His name is Mr. Chris Broussard. Chris is a respected journalist. He's also a commentator on various networks, including ESPN. But the reason that I enjoy talking to Chris is because he's just a good brother. He has a great degree of appreciation and respect for his people, his community. And first, I want to ask Chris, how you doing today, man?
I'm great, man. It's a pleasure to be on. Happy holidays.
Same to you, man. You know, the honor's all mine. Now, a lot of people know about the great work that you do on ESPN, and I encourage people to go look at your bio as well because what I really saw when I looked at your bio as a journalist is this ascendancy where it seemed that because you had a standard of excellence in your life, you just kind of jumped, at various periods in your career, and each time your extraordinary ability was recognized by the next level, and so it was a natural progression for you. I want to just start by asking you about that. Now, where were you born and raised, and sort of where did your career kind of take you?
Well, as far as born and raised, I was born in Baton Rouge, Louisiana, Creole background. But I grew up. We moved from there when I was a baby. We moved to Cincinnati, Ohio, and my father worked for Travelers Insurance Company. And true to their name, we traveled. So I lived in Cincinnati, Indianapolis, Syracuse, New York, Des Moines, Iowa, and Cleveland, Ohio, all before I finished high school. So I finished high school in Cleveland, went to Oberlin College, which was about 40 minutes away from Cleveland, and then began my career working at the Cleveland Plain Dealer. So as far as my upbringing, the early part of my life, I guess you'd say I'm from the Midwest and lived in Ohio probably more than anywhere. Like I said, started working at the Cleveland Plain Dealer, covering high school sports. I was a part-time high school reporter there for 4 years, and then I went to the Akron Beacon Journal in 1995 or late 1994. And that's really where I got my first big break. About 6 months after I joined them, they promoted me to cover the Cleveland Cavaliers as a beat writer. And so that's when I began covering the NBA and basically have been covering the NBA for the last 19 years.
Hmm. Well, it's interesting that you came out of Ohio, because Ohio to me is a special place, and for various reasons. Obviously, you've got the presence of LeBron James, who I think is a transformative figure in sports. He's not just an athlete; he's proven that he's more than just a basketball player. And then you have the extraordinary football tradition of Ohio. Particularly, you think about where Maurice Claret came from. What's the name of the town again? That Maurice
Youngstown.
Youngstown.
Came from
Thank you, thank
Youngstown.
you, thank you. And the Ohio State Buckeyes. I'm an alumni of Ohio State, and in the midst of all of this, you kind of also have this backdrop of the very complex existence of black males in the state of Ohio, right? I mean, you've got the best of the best, the elite of the elite, and then you've got some kind of the worst of the worst when it comes to, say, the criminal justice system, and how many black men get caught in that system, how many black men are locked away. In fact, just yesterday I interviewed a brother who was locked up in Ohio, actually, and for 15 years, and he was telling me how he helped after he was released. He worked as the attorney for his cellmate to help him get out, because he said that despite the fact that because what had happened basically was the guy he killed a friend of his when he was 16, because they both worked for the same drug dealer who forced him to commit this murder, because the kid didn't pay his money or whatever. So for 15, 20 years, the victim's mother had been fighting to help get the young man out of prison who killed her son, and the system still said no. We want this guy locked up. We're not going to let him out. So when I think about Ohio, I just see that those mixed outcomes, and the last point that comes to mind is when I think about a guy like a Maurice Claret, how he was here one minute and then here the next, and when you look at his story, you kind of see how these systematic factors really shape his outcomes. Right? It wasn't all that Maurice Claret wanted to be a bad person. In fact, I don't think Maurice is a bad person. Maybe you can tell me about that. But it just seemed that the system kind of drove him in certain directions, and maybe he didn't quite know how to respond. So, with that being said, had your experience as a native of Ohio, which I consider you to be an Ohio native, has that shaped your interest in the experience of the black male in America?
Well, certainly. I mean, I lived there from the time I was a baby until about 7 is when I was in Cincinnati. And my father grew up in Cincinnati, even though he was born in Louisiana. He grew up in Cincinnati, and he really shaped my love and appreciation for being black. He was very pro-black, not militant, not didn't know a ton of black history, but he was just pro-black. I mean, like a lot of black people, when we watch football games, we always pull for the black quarterback, the head coach. Really, we took a lot of pride in the fact that blacks were dominant in in sports and popular culture and stuff like that. So that's somewhat on a superficial level, but it still fostered a lot of black pride in me. And I know him, he and my mother met. They went to the HBCU Xavier down in Louisiana. And, they always were active in their alumni chapter up in Cincinnati. So we were involved in that as well. And my dad actually, believe it or not, he studied when he was in high school in Cincinnati. He studied to be a priest for 2 years. And the reason, now I'm glad he didn't become a priest because, Catholic priests are celibate, so I wouldn't be here. So I'm glad he changed his mind. But what triggered that was he was at the seminary, it may have been all white other than him, but it was certainly overwhelmingly white. And one day a friend of his asked him, "Why are you so dark?" Now, mind you, he's just barely darker than me, a shade darker than me. And he said, "Well, maybe it's because I'm colored." That was my dad's answer, because that's, colored. This is 1950s. And that afternoon, like at lunch, my dad said everybody, was shunning him. Guys that were friends of his wouldn't sit down and eat with him. Even some of the administrators and priests were a bit, standoffish with him now. And so he went home, talked to his dad, and his dad told him, he said, "Look, son, everybody's not meant to be Jackie Robinson." And so my dad left the seminary and, went on to get married and everything. So, I think some of that, and I know he used to tell us stories that, fostered a lot of black pride in us. When he was in Vietnam, he would be hanging, with some white guys, and they would start talking about blacks, not knowing he was black, because he's light like me, straight hair, and they would use the N-word and things like that. He would end up getting in fights with them, because they talking about blacks and not knowing he was black. I remember he also told us these stories where when he was in Vietnam, now he wasn't on the front lines, but some of the brothers that were on the front lines would come back and tell stories about how some of the Viet Cong would like have them in their scope, like basically be in a position to kill these brothers, and whether from the front or the back. And some of the brothers said they would hear somebody say, "Soul brother duck, soul brother duck," and they would duck and
Wow.
yeah. So really interesting stuff. But that's where the root of my black consciousness or appreciation for being black came from. And then when I got into college, that's when I really was starting to be exposed to black studies classes and black professors. And even, it may be the same for you, even hip hop at that time. This is late 80s. You had KRS-One, you had, Eric B. and Rakim, Public Enemy, Brand Nubian. You had a lot of black consciousness in hip hop. And so my love for hip hop and then being exposed to black professors and stuff, that's when I really began to think critically about the black plight. Before it was just, we great in sports and, we love to we can party and we can rap and, superficial stuff that had really made me proud to be black. But then when I got into college, I really started, studying Black history and really looking at our plight. And that's kind of, and seeing that, behind the glitter and the glamour of sports and pop culture, we really were struggling, and still are as a people. And so that's what led me to feel like, when I did get out and quote unquote make it, that I always wanted to be connected to the Black community and give back and try to help, help our people rise up.
That's really interesting you say that. I mean, you think about when I think about the early '90s. Actually, I think about remember that group X Clan. I know you
Yeah,
remember.
yeah,
I
yeah.
mean, and I played some X Clan, man. I played X Clan for this young lady who wasn't around to hear it, and because she was actually, it was funny. She was complaining about the music that she hears now, and she said, I just feel like this is just not good for me. So she was kind of almost like Neo in the Matrix. I use that analogy we were talking earlier, where she knows there's got to be more than this, right?
Yeah.
Even though she hasn't heard anything else. So I said, well, let me play some X Clan for you. And she heard X Clan, where he's like, heed the words of the brother, and he's rapping about the greatness of blackness and intelligence and kings and queens in
Yeah.
Africa, and I said, this was one of the top groups in the country. Maybe
Yeah.
they might have had the number one song in hip hop for a while. And she said, "Are you serious? I can't believe that a group like this would be number one." And she loved it. And
Yeah.
I think it's sad because kids today don't get to experience that. Now, with that
It's
said,
so sad. I mean, I agree. I mean, X Clan was dope, and like you had poor righteous teachers, you had gangster. I mean, that was kind of the predominant for a few years, the predominant form of hip hop. Remember the song "Self Destruction" that
yep,
they made, and even the videos, X Clan videos, that really promoted Afrocentricity and the visual aspects of it. There are some people that theorize that, in the 60s, obviously, you had the Black Power movement, you had Malcolm X, you had Stokely Carmichael, and all of that really was opening the eyes of Black people. And then there are people that theorize that, to counter that, the powers that be started forcing the Black exploitation movies onto the Black community, where we were pimps, and some of the Black exploitation movies though did end up having a positive theme, but still it kind of glamorized the pimp culture and things like that. And then there are those that compare that to what happened in hip hop, when again in the late 80s, early 90s, you had this conscious hip hop. So to counter that, that was really waking up a lot of Black people. I don't believe the movie Malcolm X by Spike Lee would have been made if it weren't for hip hop, because hip hop created that environment where everybody was interested. Remember the X caps and African medallions, and that was popular and that was making money. And so Spike was able to make that movie about Malcolm X. But then to counter that, you had gangster rap come in, which totally ended up, basically washing away the conscious hip hop. And, there are those that theorize it really is the same thing to keep the Black masses from, being conscious. And because for a while, hip hop was making education cool. I mean, KRS One said knowledge reigns supreme over nearly everyone. The age of the ignorant rapper is done. All that stuff. And you're right. I love hip hop, but it's a shame what has happened to it. And really, in many respects, certainly not all hip hop, but the hip hop, a lot of the popular hip hop, in many respects, has become an enemy of Black people.
well, I think that now, and this actually allows us to segue into something that you wanted to talk about. Now I think the hypocrisy is becoming that much more blatant, because now you have rappers that are saying, hands up, don't shoot, but yet in every song you're talking about shooting somebody, right? Or saying, I'm not a thug, respect me as a human being because I'm not a thug, but yet in that last song, you were talking about how you a thug nigga. Excuse my French, but you know what I'm talking about. You hear this stuff. In fact, one of the most popular rappers promoted by BET this year was Young Thug. Again, if you think about this idea of saying to the world, we are human beings. Treat us like human beings. We are not monsters. We are not scary people. But yet, everything in entertainment is going in that other direction of saying, I will do horrible things to you. I will kill people for no reason. Even Lil Wayne actually had songs where he talks about, he says, I'll shoot your grandmother up. I'll kill a little baby if I have to. He says these in songs. So why wouldn't I be afraid of the person that's saying these things? But here's the funny thing too. I'd love to get your take on that. Is this music's not being promoted by us, right? We don't own the labels that are putting this out. We don't own Clear Channel, right? So what are your thoughts in terms of just kind of that contradiction between the concern for Eric Garner and Michael Brown versus this blatant disrespect for the value of black male life that we're really seeing in entertainment right now?
Yeah, great point. I didn't like what happened in Ferguson with Michael Brown. Didn't like, obviously, even more so because we had the video, what happened with Eric Garner. And I believe that there needs to be real reform in terms of, the police department's dealings with the black community in particular. Because five unarmed black men were murdered or shot and killed in August alone by policemen. And we saw, we've all seen that video where the brother is stopped and gets out of his truck and the policeman tells him to go get your wallet, and he reaches into the truck to get his wallet and ends up being shot four times, or maybe 4 to 6 times. Fortunately, he wasn't, killed. But these things have to cease. And I think now, because of social media, and everybody having an iPhone and a camera and stuff, we're seeing more of it. It's a lot more prominent as far as the reporting of it. I think it may have even lessened over the years because we know that this has historically gone on in the black community. But it certainly seems like it's increased because of the social media and stuff. So I'm totally, against what's happened recently with police killings of unarmed black men. And I also know that it is different. You hear those sometimes when you're talking about it, people will bring up, particularly conservatives will bring up, well, why aren't you up in arms about blacks killing blacks and, all of that? That's what you really should be focused on. And my answer to that is, first of all, we are focused on that. Secondly, we should be focused on both. But thirdly, the average brother on the block isn't paid to protect and serve. That's the difference. You're talking about policemen who are supposed to protect and serve killing unarmed people versus, a citizen who doesn't have that responsibility. Now, granted, we don't like that. We hope that citizen doesn't do it, but he's not blatantly breaking the code of his job and what he was actually hired to do when he kills somebody. So that's a big difference. But I do say this, even as we are critical of the system, which I kind of just talked about, we also, as African Americans, have to look in the mirror as well and see what we are doing to contribute to the problem. We didn't start this negative image of black men. We know that the negative image of black men was started centuries ago during the beginnings of the Atlantic slave trade. And then, of course, during slavery and segregation and Jim Crow, because it was a way to justify mistreating us, enslaving us, castrating us, killing us, and things like that. They made up these myths about how we're violent and we're oversexed and, we're subhuman and all. It was even in the laws, 3/5 of a human being. So all of that was put upon us. So we didn't create that image, but today some of us are doing things that perpetuate that image and exacerbate the problem with that negative image. And a lot of the most popular rappers are certainly doing just that. And we have to look and see, like you said, most whites, not all, but many, they don't have daily interactions with black people. So where are they getting their view and their impression of black people from? what they see on television, what they hear on the radio. And as you said, if we are consistently promoting that I pull out the gat and cap you and take you out, and kill you, like we're just crazed criminals, then it's sad, but can you blame this person for looking at you like that? For thinking that, you'll pull out when you're reaching in your pocket, you're not reaching for a wallet, you're reaching for a gun because, you always carrying your gun and you always ready to, shoot somebody, so, look, you and I know you've been very much, at the forefront of trying to, talking about the negativity of a lot of this music. And I see it too, and I've talked about it as well. And unfortunately, people aren't hearing the argument that this can really poison the minds of young children. That is, you've had psychologists on to talk about it and doctors, and it can do that for sure. So, but they aren't hearing that. But maybe our people will hear, look, if you won't change it for that reason, then change it because this is promoting the negative image of black men and it's playing into the hands of the prison industrial complex. When people see that black males are only, or blacks are 13% of the population, but 40% of the prison population, they don't think, wow, that's wrong. Something's off about that. They think, well, listen to the songs. This is what they say they do. This is what they do. They kill each other. They rob each other. They sell drugs to each other, and that's all they think we're about. So people aren't up in arms as they should be when you look at the discrepancies in these statistics of prison, the war on drugs and things like that, because we're playing right into the hands of it. And so, I have a comparison, and I don't want to single out any rappers because, a lot of these brothers, unfortunately, are in positions where they feel like that's all they can do. But, a lot of these brothers who are making millions off of the promotion of black crime, black criminalization, black on black, killings, disrespecting black women and things like that. And they're getting, gold and platinum and, money and Hennessy and Cristal and all that. I compare them to, remember, every African in the slave trade wasn't kidnapped by a white man. You had black Africans who would go and kidnap other black Africans and give them over to the white slave traders. And what would they get in return? Some trinkets, some gunpowder, some rum, some little gold, trinkets and things like that. And they sold out their people to get these trinkets and this alcohol and these guns and things like that. And it's very comparable to what is going on today on a different level. So, hopefully we can have some type of resurrection of black pride where we just say, you know what? We're not going to make music anymore about killing each other. We just not going to do it. We're not going to make music anymore about disrespecting black women and, how we're criminals and stuff. Because you're right. And it's not just the rappers. It has to be taken to the record labels, who own it has to be taken maybe even to the disc jockeys, to the radio stations. And it has to be a strong appeal, I believe, started and pushed by black men. I believe we're the ones that need to push it, and because it's racism. Simple as and plain. There's no other group of people that is degraded consistently day after day, hour after hour on the radio than us. There's no other race is degraded like that and murdered and sold drugs to it and things like that. That's happening to us. And so we need to really speak out about it. And look, the one thing we do control, we don't control the record companies. We don't control the radio stations. What we do control is the art. There's no doubt we control the art. If we decided to rap about bacon and eggs, it would be hot, right? I mean, we could rap about whatever we want. It would be hot. When we rapped about black consciousness, it was hot. When we rapped about basketball with Curtis Blow, it was hot. Whatever we rap about is going to be hot, going to be popular, and we're going to make money off of it. So if we just said, we're not rapping about murdering each other and killing each other and black crime, because we're not criminals, we're not thugs, we could change it. But, it only takes one brother to say, well, I'm going to do it, and then it starts a stream. But still, that brother, if he's going to do that, he needs to be, blacks need to boycott that type of music. And, we can't, I hate to say it because, again, the system is wrong, but we can't keep just complaining about the way people view us and have this negative image of us when we promote that negative image and we glorify that negative image and we glamorize that negative image. So,
Well, that's a good point. I mean, a porn star can't say, why do you not treat me like I'm a nun? Because you're not acting like one. I mean, that's just, people see what they see and they're going to respond that way. And I agree with you. And I like what you said about toxic hip hop really being a form of racism, because a lot of people think that racism must always come with a white face. And in fact, the most effective racism is when they put a black face on it, because then you let your guard down and you think, well, this can't be racist because he's black. Well, no, if the puppet is black but the puppet master is not, then the effect is the effect is still the same. And so, speaking of doing something and leading the charge with black men, I'm glad you brought that up, because that actually leads to my next question on a movement. You created something called the King Movement that relates to black men, and this is, in case people wonder, this is why I'm so happy to talk to Chris, because I love what he's doing with the King Movement. I've always said repeatedly that black men are going to have to lead the charge in the black community. I don't care if anybody gets mad about that. We as men must stand up and claim our right to the throne. If you don't take the throne, no one will ever give you the throne or welfare or layaway or because they feel sorry for you. They will only concede the throne if you stand up and take it. So tell me about the King Movement, because I love it.
Well, the King Movement is an acronym that stands for Knowledge, Inspiration, and Nurture Through God. And it's a Christ-centered organization. And it's for men of all races, but we do have a specific emphasis on, reaching and dealing with issues that are pertinent to the African-American community. One of our theme scriptures, if you will, we have 3 theme scriptures, and one of them is Psalm 68:31. And that is, princes shall come out of Egypt, Ethiopia shall soon stretch forth her hands unto God. And we know Egypt and Ethiopia are African nations. And so that scripture is actually a prophecy that black men or men of African descent will become royalty, princes, when we submit to God. Stretching forth our hands to God is a sign of submission, symbolic of submission to God. And so one thing we promote, and it's really appropriate at this time, specifically with what's happened recently in the country, but we do promote that black men, we understand historically, as I said earlier, a negative image has been placed on black men to justify our enslavement and the discrimination against us and so on and so forth. That some of the mainstream society has that negative image, as we see, with a policeman who may not be blatantly racist or consciously racist, but his image of black people has led some of these guys to shoot quick, without even giving us the benefit of the doubt that they give to men of other races and even boys, as we've seen, sadly, of other races. So much of the outside society has this negative image of black men. But sadly, many of us, as you know, boys, some of us have embraced that negative image to where we think an authentic black man, a real brother is a thug, right? Is a pimp, is a Mac and a gangster and all that, and all we can do is play ball and make music and dance and things like that. Some of us have embraced that negative mentality, that slave mentality, that negative image. I've even heard it, in sports. I remember a couple years ago when Meta World Peace, it used to be named Ron Artest, he was asked who's the smartest player on the Lakers, and he said probably Steve Nash because he's white. That's a sign of how we've embraced, our inferiority, and there are many other signs of that in popular culture and things like that. And so what we do in King, I see you now. What we do in King is we say to brothers, look, let's not believe what we know and admittedly and deniably racist culture has taught us about ourselves. That we're negative, that we're inferior, that we're unintelligent, we're stupid, we're immoral, we're violent, this and that. Let's not believe that, because we know that was put on us for negative reasons by people that didn't care about us. Let's not believe that. And instead, let's believe what God has said about us in the Bible, a book that universally around the world is regarded as a book of truth. People have different interpretations, but it is regarded as the best-selling book in the world. It's regarded by people of various religions as a book of truth. Our president, individual citizens, when we want you to tell the truth, you put your hand on that book in court, the president taking his oath of office, all that stuff. So this book says that we shall become royalty. This book in Acts chapter 8 talks about, this is 2,000 years ago, mind you. The apostle Philip is going to Gaza and he meets up with an Ethiopian man, Ethiopian eunuch. And when Philip finds this Ethiopian man, a black man, clearly, he's reading. He's reading the Bible, in fact, but he is reading. And you and I know, boys, that it was against the law for us to read for 250 years. And then after that, it was, a lot of miseducation and things like that as well. So much so that we as a people, there's a saying that's popular in our culture. The best place to hide something from a black person is in a book, and so many of our young brothers do believe that, if you're doing well in school, if you're being educated, you speak proper English, that you're acting white. So what does that mean? You think being stupid, getting failing grades, and not being able to speak properly is acting black. So we're saying, look, this book of truth tells you that 2,000 years ago, black people were reading. All right. So how can that's 16, 15, 1400 years before we encountered the Europeans in the slave trade. So that clearly, things like that are what we teach and what we try to impact on our young brothers. And there are many more, there's men in the Bible who were black, who were family men, Jethro. There are men in the Bible, who were black, who were great leaders, Nimrod in Genesis chapter 10 and 11. And, so we say, look, let's believe what God has said about us and not believe what a racist society has taught us to believe about ourselves. And if we do that, we'll be better men, we'll be better fathers, we'll be better husbands, and we'll be better, leaders in our community. And that's one of the major steps we have to take to really help, lift up our people and just better the quality of life in our communities.
Well, speaking of of leadership, and that's what I love. I love the fact that you're not afraid of taking a little controversy if the situation calls for it. If it comes down to what you believe in, you stand your ground very well. No pun intended, as we know the term "stand your ground" has some interesting connotations. And you talk about lifting people up. One example that comes to mind for me is there's a young brother that works with Ball Sports. He's a great young sports journalist. His name is Jeff Lighty, and so if Jeff is watching, he's probably tripping out because I'm talking about him right now. But Jeff is he I mentioned you to him, and I said, you need to go really look into this guy, even though he already knew you from ESPN. I said, no, I want you to go study him so that you can really understand what it means for a black man to pursue excellence in his life. Now, I brought that up at the beginning of the interview, and I want to bring it up again now. And so, I would like for if you could kind of define just two or three principles that you as a black man, and I'm not just talking about work and achievement. I'm talking about just life in general that sort of guide you in your day to day decisions. Because I can tell you, I believe that your life is nothing more than a manifestation of your day-to-day actions and who you are on the inside. If you're messed up on the inside and you're doing a bunch of messy, stupid stuff, your life is going to be a complete mess. You have more babies, mamas than you can count. I mean, we see craziness going on, right? We see baby mamas everywhere. Child support courts taking all your money. You got a prison record maybe, or you're dealing with other addictions maybe for alcohol, drugs that you picked up maybe because you thought that was what you were supposed to do as a black man, right? We see it kind of across the board. So from your perspective, for you as a black man, what are some of the guiding principles that carry you through your day-to-day life?
Well, first and foremost, as I said earlier, I'm a Christian. Became a Christian when I was 21 years old in college, my senior year of college. And that's really guided me, that's what's guided me these last 25 years, is my relationship with Christ, my faith in Jesus Christ. And so, every day I try to read some of the Bible or pray, at the very least pray. And staying spiritually grounded, that's really the first and foremost in my life. And that's really what makes me who I am. The principles I try to live my life by, how I treat my wife, how I raise my children, how I relate to those in my ethnic family, the black community, and how I relate to those outside of it. Whether I'm materialistic or what things are important to me, trying to help others, not just trying to get mine, all of that comes from, my trying to be grounded in the word of God and trying my best. We all stumble and fall, but trying my best to follow Jesus Christ's example in my life. So that's the first principle. And I think I also realized that, being a strong man is a man who's strong spiritually and mentally, and emotionally. You could throw in physically, although, that really isn't important. A guy who's not that strong physically can still be a strong man. But in our community, again, so much of what goes on in our community dates back to our historic oppression. We were, one of the things we were able to glorify and glory in during slavery and even after was our physical prowess, our physical strength on the plantation. When we were free to do, not really working in the fields, a lot of times, the slave masters would have us box each other and wrestle and foot race, have foot races against each other. And, that became a sense, something we could take pride in, our sexual prowess, making babies, that we didn't have to take care of. That was all a part of the slave, community and existence. So, because we weren't in a position to take pride in traditional manhood type of things like providing for your family, protecting your family, having a say and a voice in society and the way your community is governed, we took pride in what we were able to, sex and women and, physical prowess, which, plays over into sports, music. Our music ability was never tried. They never tried to curtail that. That was used to entertain them and keep us, preoccupied and distracted and stuff from our plight. And so if you look at it, a lot of those things, some of us still have that mentality today. We glorify I mentioned how I grew up doing that. We glorify in our physical ability in sports, in our musical ability, in our rap with the women and the ladies and all that stuff. And that is something that I think we obviously need to, become more well-rounded and understand that being physically strong and powerful is not the essence of manhood, but the essence of it is being, since you were created by God, we all were created by God. Having a relationship with our Creator is first and foremost. And then He gave us all minds and intelligence, that we can use. And so we want to be strong mentally. And then we want to be, take care of our families. That's part and parcel to manhood, is being able to provide and take care of your families and raising the next generation to be productive and positive members of society. So I would say those are, trying to be, strong mentally, physically, emotionally, and spiritually, of course. I guess those are principles that guide my life, that I try to be a balanced human being and individual.
Tell me about work ethic and professionalism, in terms of the consistency of the work ethic, etc. That helped you. From what I understand, I don't have your bio memorized, but as you rose through the ranks, I assume that there were just increased expectations on you as a journalist, in order for you to be able to do the things you've done.
Yeah.
Tell me about that, because I think brothers should hear that as well. That success doesn't just happen like that.
Yeah, and I think a lot of our young people of all races, nowadays I think Hillary Clinton brought it up. Some have a sense of entitlement. They're brothers and brothers of all races again in college to feel like they should be up there on First Take debating with Stephen A. Smith, right out of college, or they can do Mike Wilbine's job or Tony Kornheiser's or Skip Bayless's or my job, right out of school. And it does take hard work, and what they may not see is the path that a lot of these guys walk. My path, I started out, like I said, as a part-time sports writer at the Cleveland Plain Dealer. And then I started covering high school sports at the Plain Dealer. I did that for 4 or 5 years before I was promoted to covering the NBA. And so that, I tell young guys all the time, I say, look, it's good to have, and it's very important to have future goals and map out where you want to be in 5, 10, 20 years. So if you want to be at ESPN, or if you want to be at the New York Times or TNT or wherever, you want to be the next, Keith Olbermann or something. That's great. Have that goal, but you can't be so preoccupied with that, thinking where you should be, where you want to be, that you're not excelling where you're at, that you're not focusing where you're at. For instance, if you're a young sports writer and you cover high school sports, if you're so focused on, man, I should be covering the Knicks, I should be on ESPN talking, I know more than so-and-so, he's on TV every day. If you're so focused on that, then you won't excel on your high school beat. And you'll never get to that level you want to go to. The best way to move up to the level you want to go to is to excel where you're at. If it's covering recreational softball in the summer, which I did, then you have to do the best you can. You have to write the best stories you can write. I cover high school sports, man. I got tons of stories about, writing stories in my car, writing stories, sending stories from payphones at a gas station at midnight. And I mean, getting locked into schools and, keeping my own statistics all while sitting in cold weather and snow in the bleachers, forget the press box. I mean, so you have to work your way up and earn pay your dues. So that's one thing. And the second thing I would say is it's important to have a nice balance between being confident in yourself and believing in yourself, and also being humble. There's a fine line between confidence and arrogance. And what you want is, to be confident, believe, but also be humble. And my first experience, I had a summer internship in Cleveland at the Plain Dealer. I was still in college going into my senior year. And my first assignment, I really didn't do a good job. And the assistant sports editor at the time went off on me. I mean, essentially was telling me, look, everybody's not meant to be a journalist. I'm sure there's something you can do, but it's probably not this. He didn't say it that way, but that was kind of the point coming across. And he was yelling at me and everything. And so I had to maintain my belief in myself and be strong enough to believe and say, I can do this, but also be humble enough to listen to the constructive criticism he was giving me and not get all arrogant. He don't know what he's talking about, man. Forget him. Or he don't talk to me like I'm walking out of here, like, stuff like that. And so being humble enough to take the advice and yet confident enough to still believe I could do it going forward, was critical to my development. I was at that Plain Dealer 4 years after I went to work there. I wanted to go full time, and they had a full time opening. I applied for it and didn't get it. And I had to still be confident enough to feel like, what? I couldn't feel like, man, I'm just not that good. I'm not good enough to do it. I had to have the confidence to believe I could still achieve my goals. And I ended up leaving there, going to another newspaper, and that's when I got promoted to the NBA coverage and, so on and so forth. And so, I would say, in addition to working hard where you're at, also be humble and yet confident enough to know you can do it. And also, I would even say to some of our African American viewers of this, this Skype, this episode, whatever I should call it. We bring you may bring something unique to the table. There are ways we all, regardless of race, have to conform to the culture, but you also may have something unique that you can bring to the table because you're African American or Hispanic or Asian or something. I think of Stuart Scott. Stuart Scott transformed, broadcasting.
Yes, he did. Yes, he did.
He came up there and brought, all the hip hop lines and, cooler than the other side of the pillow and all the slang he brought, while still also it being rooted in proper standard English. I mean, now you turn on SportsCenter and everybody's using those slang terms, And when you see him, he doesn't even use them as much anymore, but he really changed the culture. I always say, I don't know that there would have been a Charles Barkley or a Stephen A. Smith if Stuart Scott hadn't come in and changed things. I may be wrong, but I think he really changed the tenor, because before that, a lot of times, in most cases, the brothers really, you straightened up and it was all proper and, trying to do it that way. And he came, with the hip hop flavor and, and really opened some doors, not just for black broadcasters, but as I said earlier, white ones as well.
Well, and I agree with you. I love that. What I love about Stuart Scott's amazing ability is that, I think he was able to say, you know what, I could try to be like that guy over there, but I'll never be as good at being him as I am at being myself. Right? Yeah. If you're always trying to be somebody else, then the best you'll be is a decent substitute. Right? Mm-hmm. But if you figure out what makes you unique, and then lace that with just strong fundamentals, which, because there's no question that Stewart understood sports as well as anyone else. Mm-hmm. He was as good of a journalist as anyone else. You know what I mean? He followed all the commentary rules in terms of providing adequate information, right? But then he laced it with this special kind of swag, if you will, that made him an absolute legend. I mean, it was
Yeah.
risky. I remember people criticizing that and saying, "Oh, this isn't appropriate." But you know what? I mean, I agree with you. Now all those people are looking back and saying, "Wow, this guy really changed the game." Now, I had said to you when we first started off the air. I said I got a little surprise question for you, and I want to get a natural reaction, so I'm gonna bring it up. It's not too controversial, but I'm curious. If you might have heard of this guy by the name of Charles Barkley. I don't know. You probably don't know who he is. Not many people know who Barkley is. Now he said some interesting things. He's been in the media for some some remarks about Eric Garner and Ferguson that were somewhat questionable, if you will. A lot of people had a problem with it, but then some people supported him. If you were sitting on the air with Barkley, remember he and Kenny Smith had that conversation. If you were in Kenny Smith's seat having that conversation with Barkley, what would that conversation look like?
Yeah, that's a great question because I remember, and I applaud Kenny for writing the article in response to Charles in USA Today, and then on the set they talked about it. And I remember thinking, if I was in that position, what would I be saying to Charles? And first of all, I love Charles. I think everybody, loves Charles. I've met him, know him, and he's always told me every time I've seen him too is, keep doing what you're doing, man. You making us proud. We need brothers out there like you. So, I like Charles for many reasons. I do disagree with him on this case, with Ferguson and Eric Garner and stuff. And one thing I thought was missing from the discussions that Kenny and even Shaq got involved that they had with Charles was just simply a presentation of the facts. Because Kenny, when he talked with Charles, he talked about the root of the tension between the black community and policemen. And he talked about how it was kind of rooted in, obviously slavery, but then, segregation and Jim Crow and, all the mistreatment over the years that blacks had encountered with the police. And it goes back, let's not even go to slavery. It goes back to the black codes, in the early 20th century when black men were criminalized, meaning arrested and sent to jail or prison, obviously away from their families and taken out of, being able to have viable jobs and employment, criminalized for things like being unemployed, vagrancy, for gathering, 3-4 brothers in front of a store standing around. You could be arrested for that, for not stepping off of the sidewalk when a white person was walking towards you. Things like that. These brothers became criminals for things like that. And so that criminalized a lot of our men, and who knows what came of their children, and who grew up thinking their father's a criminal or, whatever the case may be. But that created a lot of the tension and the distrust that exists between, the policemen and the black community. So Kenny kind of he didn't go into those specifics. And again, that was missing. Some specific examples like that, okay? But there's also present day stuff. I mean, you could just bring up simple fact. Again, nobody mentioned that 5 unarmed black men were killed by policemen in August alone. That one of those black men, John Crawford, if I'm not mistaken, was standing in a Walmart with a BB gun, sitting like holding it like this, not aiming it at anybody, on a cell phone with a BB gun in his hand, shot and killed by the policeman. Again, we talked about the brother in the video being shot at, just for reaching into his truck to get his wallet, which the policeman told him to get. We could talk about Tamir Rice, who the policeman who shot him, another suburb of Cleveland, which I know well, Independence, Ohio, where really nothing goes on. They deemed this cop unfit to carry a gun. And yet he was hired in Cleveland and he ended up shooting this 12-year-old kid immediately almost. The examples like that were missing from the discussion, because then it's difficult for Charles Barkley to say, well, race has nothing to do with it. Or, they just, like Barkley, one of the things he said was, you only interact with the cops when you're doing something wrong. Come on. I know, I know, and I'm sure you do. I know brothers who had one brother who is on the airwaves and nationally known. I'm not going to say his name. It's for him to say it if he wants to publicly. But he told me like 2 weeks ago, he is stopped by policemen once every 6 months, roughly, for nothing, for simply driving. You know, I spoke with another friend of mine who's, works in the media, who is very high ranking. He told me by his count, he's been stopped 6 times by policemen, again, for absolutely no reason. I was stopped with a professional athlete. We were in the car together and we were stopped for no reason. The officer made up something but didn't give a ticket. No real interrogation or anything. Just stopped us because he may have thought we were up to no good. So examples like that, I'm sure Charles Barkley probably has examples in his life like that, I would think. Or, and I've encouraged brothers to say, look, you need to share those examples on television, because a lot of times with whites, it's not always and necessarily racism. It may just be ignorance of what black people experience. They don't maybe experience those things with the policemen, so they don't think we do either. We're American citizens just like them. But when a prominent African American that they've heard of shares, look, man, I'm not shooting down the police. I respect the police. I'm thankful for the police, but I'm stopped like once every 6 to 9 months, just for driving, and not doing anything. When you start to share those things, that can open up the eyes of whites and those in mainstream society who may have the power to change these things. So, I also with Charles would share, like I said, it's statistics. Even though like this, they have in New York City stop and frisk, where close to 90% of the people stopped and frisked are blacks or Latinos. And yet studies have come out that show that the whites that they've stopped in New York City, 1 out of every 49 whites that they stopped had a gun on them. 1 out of every 71 Latinos had a gun on them. And 1 out of every 93 African Americans had a gun on them. So we're actually the least likely. I don't know what the Asian percentage was, but we were the least likely to have a gun on us. It was the same for drugs. For whites, it was like 1 out of 43. Hispanics, it was 1 out of 59, 57. For us, it was 1 out of 61. So we're the least likely in New York to have guns and drugs on us, and yet we're the most likely to be stopped and frisked. And 90% of the people they stop and frisk of all races are totally innocent, stopped and frisked for no reason.
Wow.
Sharing these things with Charles, these are straight up facts, not what I feel, what I think, what I, in my privileged position, what I experience. These are facts. And that's what I would have liked to have seen shared with him.
Well, I like that analysis. I mean, your approach to the Barkley thing is probably a little more civil than mine has been. The one time I did talk about Barkley on an ESPN show, it was quite frankly back in the day. I love that show. I thought it was such a great show.
I always say, man, and I tell Stephen A, I said, look, he brought on writers of all races.
Yes, he did.
But he really brought on a lot of black sports writers.
Yes.
And I said, little black boys who were watching that show, they must have been shocked that there were that many black sports. Like, wow, look at all these black sports writers from San Francisco and LA and all parts of the country. And I think that really went a long way in sparking in the minds of young brothers, I can do that too.
Oh yeah, Steve. Yeah, that was one of the best shows ever. I always felt like it. Are you able to hear me? Okay,
Yeah.
okay. Sorry about that. I hit a button. But I always said that was like the Oprah Winfrey show for black men. It was such a great show, and unfortunately, when I know that the kind of black man I am, I know that if I start to like something too much, that means the show's probably in trouble. So, which we saw what happened, to the show, unfortunately. But hey man, I really enjoyed this conversation. This has been just a thorough learning experience and great dialogue. Now, if people want to get in touch with you, they want to follow up and support the King movement, or support the event that you're having tomorrow, where you're helping brothers get free haircuts for boys under the age of 12. Is that correct? And
Yeah,
then
it's the second annual King Holiday Haircuts, and what we're doing is in Newark, New Jersey, 402 Broad Street. Tomorrow, Saturday, December 20th, from 11 a.m. to 4 p.m. And all boys ages 12 and under get a free haircut, and boys and men 13 and over get a $5 haircut. So we want brothers looking fresh for the holidays. You know what I'm saying? And so, and it'll be food there. There'll be music. We have a DJ playing, hip hop music and stuff like that. No killing. No, we aren't gonna be killing any people in our music, but we have brothers spinning and scratching, playing, mixing, and all that stuff. And so just a good time to hang out. I'm actually gonna there'll be a NBA trivia contest where, people that come in can kind of challenge me to NBA trivia and win prizes and stuff. And so it's just going to be a good day in the community. But yeah, we want people to come out and support that. You can go to, if you want to learn more about the King Movement, you can go to kingmovement.com, kingmovement.com, and learn about what we're doing. And also, Boyce, I do speak at churches and colleges and, various schools and corporations, things like that. So if anybody would be interested in having me speak about sports or about African-American issues or whatever it may be, you can go visit Chris Broussard Speaks, chrisbroussardspeaks.com, and, maybe look into booking me for a speaking engagement.
absolutely. Well, I love it. Well, hey man, I really appreciate the fact that you are so determined to speak to your people. As you know, that's not always as common as it should be. I know that amongst other scholars, it's hit or miss whether I can get another scholar to understand the importance of bringing our expertise, our power, our resources to the community, and you have to have a certain grounding to do that. And for you, it was your father. It sounds like, and your mother too, I'm sure.
Yeah.
Right, and for me, my parents as well. Certain things they said to me along the way that I learned about manhood that guided, my path to manhood, and I find that typically, even if you go to Dr. King, when I studied, I was not as impressed studying Martin Luther King Jr. as I was impressed studying Martin Luther King Sr. When I saw the tree from which he came, that helped me understand the man a whole lot better. So so I applaud your parents for producing a brother that cares about his people, and I think that's what's going to elevate our community is when black men who are like-minded, who are tired of the nonsense, who want something better for the people they care about, come together and stand up to protect our families against all enemies, both foreign and domestic. That means sometimes you might have to get in the face of another black man and say, not here. This is not going to happen. So thank you for your strength, man. I truly appreciate it, brother.
Oh man, you're welcome, and I love what you're doing, with your Black World, and you keep me informed, man. I get your emails every day, a few a day, I think, and it really keeps me informed on what's going on, and that's when I really, began seeing so many incidents of police brutality against, blacks, whether they might not get killed, but shot at or brutalized or, for no reason. And so keep up the good work. And as you said, when we come together, and we certainly will always address the systemic issues and obstacles that are in the way of our people progressing. But when we also come together and say, look, we're going to do some things for ourselves too. We're going to take care and answer a lot of these problems ourselves. I actually think many people outside of our community will applaud that. Some won't. Some don't want to see that. But many who do want to see blacks progress will applaud us coming together and say, you know what, we're gonna do what we can do about this situation too.
Well, absolutely. Well, I love it. All right, brother. Well, thank you very much for your time, man. And I look forward to talking again in the future. And good luck with the King movement. I think it's extraordinary. And so, everybody, this is Mr. Chris Broussard. I want you to go check him out. Go to is it thekingmovement.com?
No, just King Movement,
King Movement.
kingmovement.com.
Okay,
Yeah.
go to kingmovement.com and look into this guy. I've had a chance to really talk to him. Off the record, I can say that there's a lot more to him than what you see on television. He's actually got a lot of interests that I think are going to be beneficial to a lot of people. Well, I'm Dr. Boyce Watkins from Your Black World. I want to say thank you all for checking us out. And until we meet again, please stay strong, be blessed, and be educated. We are gone. Peace.